The countdown clock on my wrist reads 11 minutes, when the doors of the Vale flagship seal shut behind me, and I understand there is no way out except through the Queen herself. 11 minutes, until the human fleet parked beyond the Ring of Moons opens fire on this ship, on this station, on everything inside it, because that is the deal my own commanders made without asking me. Send one negotiator in. If the Vale do not release the hostages by the deadline, burn the ship and everyone on it, including the negotiator. That is me. My name is Daniel Hart, and nobody told me the plan had a clock attached to it until I was already halfway down the boarding tube, with no way to turn back. The corridor ahead of me is shaped wrong for a human body, narrow and ribbed like the inside of a throat, and the air smells like scorched metal, and something sweeter underneath, something almost floral, which I later learn is the scent Vale release when they are afraid. Right now, every guard lining this hallway is releasing it. 8 of them, tall and dark-shelled, each one holding a weapon shaped like a curved blade of light, and every single one of them is watching me the way you watch something that might explode. Nobody speaks. They do not need to. Their spears drop into position, crossing in front of me, and I stop walking because 6 centimeters closer, and one of those blades will be through my chest. A drone descends from the ceiling, small and silver, and a flat mechanical voice comes out of it in my own language. Human. You will state your purpose. You will not move until permission is granted. I already know what happens if I try to explain myself through that drone. The last 3 attempts at contact between our species ended in disaster, because the translation software strips out half of what a veil actually means. Tone carries meaning for them, the way words carry meaning for us. A flattened, mechanical rendering of their language sounds to a veil like a threat, no matter what the words themselves say. That is exactly why the last human envoy never made it out of this corridor alive. So I do not wait for the drone to translate anything. I speak directly to the guards, in their own language, using the exact clicking, layered tones that their programs cannot render. I studied this language for 6 years, before anyone in my command chain believed it would ever matter. Tonight it is the only thing standing between me and a spear through the ribs. I am here to speak with the Queen, I say, my voice rising and falling in the pattern that marks formal address among the outer hives. I carry no weapon. I ask only for time. The spears do not move, but something changes behind 8 sets of dark eyes. One guard tilts her head, the universal veil gesture of surprise, and the sweet fear smell in the air shifts into something else, something sharper, closer to curiosity. A human does not speak like that, one of them says. Not to me, to the others. A human is not supposed to, I answer, before anyone decides what to do with that fact. Take me to the Queen. Every minute we stand here is a minute closer to a war none of us wants. The spears lift, slowly, and the guards step aside, though every one of them keeps a hand near their weapon as I walk between them. The drone above my head trails along, useless now, translating nothing, because there is nothing left for it to translate. I am doing its job myself, and doing it correctly is the only reason I am still breathing. The throne chamber opens ahead of me, vast and echoing, built from a black stone that seems to drink the light rather than reflect it. The ceiling rises in overlapping ridges, shaped to catch sound and layer it back on itself, because the veil do not build for the eye, they build for the ear, and every surface in this room is designed to make a voice sound larger than it is. At the center of it sits Queen Sorai Vecthine, wrapped in armor plating the color of wet stone, and behind her, chained at the wrists to a low railing, are the 6 human hostages my fleet is threatening to kill an entire station to save. I recognize 2 of them from the briefing photos. A young man named Oliver, barely into his 20s, and an older woman named Grace, who used to run communications on the outpost these hostages were taken from. Both of them look up when I enter, and I see something in their faces that is not quite hope, because hope has already been burned out of them by however many days they have spent chained to that railing. What I see instead is disbelief, because nobody sent to negotiate for them was ever supposed to walk in here alone and still be alive to reach the center of the room. The Queen does not rise. 6 eyes track me across the floor, unblinking, and 4 floating drones hover at her shoulders, like small silver moons, waiting to translate whatever I say into something flat and safe. I do not intend to let them. You are not the ambassador who was scheduled to arrive, the Queen says, and her drones render it into my language half a second late, stripped of the tone underneath it. I do not need the drones to tell me the tone is not friendly. The ambassador could not make it, I answer, and this time I do not wait for translation either. I speak directly to her, in her own tongue, in the formal register reserved for addressing a hive queen, the register that took me 6 years to master, because a single wrong inflection can turn respect into insult. The chamber goes still. Every guard along the walls turns toward the throne, instead of toward me, because for a Veil, hearing an outsider speak the formal register correctly is not a compliment, it is a violation of every expectation they walked in with. The Queen's mandibles click together, once, sharp, and her 4 drones hang motionless in the air, suddenly useless, exactly like the one that followed me down the corridor. Where did a human learn to speak like that? She says, and there is no mistaking the edge under the words now, because I understand every layer of it without a machine standing between us. We have been learning your language since the day we first met your people, I answer. Not just the trade words, the court dialects, the hive registers. We have been listening for years, long after your people stopped expecting us to bother. For what purpose? The Queen says, leaning forward, and the movement makes every guard in the room tighten their grip on their weapons, as though her posture alone is a command they are ready to follow without hesitation. I have 11 minutes to answer that question honestly enough to stop a war, so I do not waste any of them on anything less than the truth. Because the last time our people misunderstood each other through broken translation, it cost lives on both sides, I say. Because a flattened voice sounds like a threat to your ears, and a machine cannot fix that, no matter how good the software becomes. I learned your language so that when a moment like this one arrived, nobody would have to guess at what the other side actually meant. The Queen studies me for a long moment, and I feel the seconds sliding away behind my ribs, because somewhere beyond the ring of moons outside this station, a fleet of human ships is watching the same countdown I am, and unlike me, they will not wait for a conversation to finish before they act. Your fleet threatens to burn this station, the Queen says. Do you call that listening? My fleet believes your people are preparing to execute 6 hostages the moment negotiations fail, I say. Do you call that trust? For the first time since I walked into this room, something in the Queen's posture shifts, not softening exactly, but recalculating, the way a person recalculates when a piece of information does not fit the shape they expected it to have. We were never going to execute them, she says. They were taken as leverage, nothing more. Your fleet was told otherwise by someone who wanted this war to happen. The floor seems to tilt slightly under that sentence, because if she is telling the truth, then the deadline burning down on my wrist is not a mistake. It is a trap, laid by someone on my own side, someone who wants a war between our species badly enough to lie to an entire fleet command to get one. Who told them that? I ask, and I do not bother softening the question, because there is no time left for softening anything. A name I do not have the authority to give you, the Queen says, and for the first time, her voice carries something that sounds almost like regret. What I can tell you is this: the lie did not originate with my people. Someone wanted your ships to fire on this station before you and I ever had the chance to speak. I think of every strange detail from the mission briefing that never quite added up. The sudden change in departure time, the commander who signed off on sending a single negotiator into a sealed enemy ship with no backup and no communication line to the fleet. The fact that nobody explained why the deadline was set so short, that failure was nearly guaranteed before I even boarded. Someone built this mission to fail on purpose, and I walked straight into the middle of it, because refusing the assignment was never actually an option offered to me. I have 9 minutes left on this clock, I say, and I believe you, but belief is not enough to stop that fleet from firing. I need something they cannot argue with. Release the hostages now, in front of me, and let me carry proof back to my own ship before the countdown ends. The Queen rises from her throne for the first time, and the sound that fills the chamber when she moves is layered and strange, dozens of small clicks overlapping into something that resembles a chord of music more than a footstep. She crosses the floor toward the railing where the hostages are chained, and every guard in the room watches her the way soldiers watch a commander walking into danger they cannot follow her into. She releases the chains herself, with her own hands, not a guard, not a drone, and I understand without being told that this gesture matters, that a queen freeing prisoners with her own claws in front of an outsider is not a small thing among her people. Oliver and Grace stumble forward, rubbing at wrists left raw from the restraints, and Grace looks at me with an expression I finally recognize, because it is the same thing I feel pressing against my own ribs. Relief mixed with disbelief, mixed with the terrible awareness that we are not safe yet, that 8 minutes on a countdown clock is still 8 minutes too few. This is not enough, I say, turning back to the Queen, because 6 freed hostages standing in a throne room does not stop a fleet from firing unless my commanders can see it happening in real time. I need a channel. I need to reach my own ship directly, without your translation drones filtering what I say, and I need it now. The Queen studies me again, and this time the pause feels different, feels like a decision being weighed rather than a threat being measured. If I open a direct channel to your fleet, she says, and your commanders hear a human voice asking them to stand down, what makes you certain they will listen to you over the orders they have already received? Nothing makes me certain, I say, because there is no honest answer that offers her false comfort, and this room has had enough dishonesty in it already tonight. But if I say nothing, the fleet fires in 8 minutes regardless. At least this way there is a chance. She gestures to one of her guards, who produces a small device from a pouch at her side, dark and unfamiliar, and hands it to the Queen. The Queen presses it into my palm herself. A direct channel, she says. Use it well. I press the activation stud, and static crackles through the small speaker, before a familiar voice cuts through it, tight and clipped, the voice of Commander Ivy Whitfield, who signed the orders that sent me down that boarding tube in the first place. "Hart, is that you?" the voice says, sharp with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "It is me," I say, and the hostages are freed, all 6 of them, standing right in front of me. This was never an execution. This was a trap built by someone who wants a war, and it worked right up until this moment. There is a long pause on the other end, long enough that I can hear my own heartbeat pressing against the silence, long enough that I glance at the countdown on my wrist and watch it slide past the 6-minute mark. "Explain," Whitfield says, and I do, as fast and as clearly as I can, laying out everything the Queen told me, the short deadline, the missing backup, the way this whole mission seemed built from the start to end in failure rather than success. "Somebody on this fleet wants this war," I say. "Somebody gave you false information about executions that were never going to happen, and if you fire on this station in 6 minutes, you will be proving them right instead of proving me wrong." Another pause, shorter this time, and when Whitfield speaks again, her voice has changed, gone from clipped and tight to something heavier, something that sounds almost like a person waking from a bad dream. "Hold position," she says, not to me, to someone else on her end, her voice pulling away from the channel for a moment before returning. "Hart, I am ordering a stand down. I need visual confirmation of the hostages, and then I am pulling every ship back from that ring." "Send it now," I say, and one of the Queen's guards steps forward with a small imaging device, capturing Oliver and Grace, and the 4 others, standing free and unharmed in the center of the throne room, and I watch the feed transmit through the channel in my hand, watch 4 minutes tick down to 3, while the data crosses the space between this station and the fleet waiting beyond the moons. 3 minutes becomes 2, and I do not breathe easily until Whitfield's voice returns, quieter now, steadier. "Stand down confirmed," she says. "All ships holding position. Hart, get everyone off that station and back to the boarding tube. I am sending an escort." The Queen watches me lower the device, and something in her posture has shifted again, the wariness replaced by something closer to careful respect, the kind you offer someone who has just proven themselves more useful alive than dead. "You stopped a war tonight," she says, and I am not certain if it is a statement or a question. "We stopped it," I say, because it is true, because none of this ends with a war averted if she had chosen the spears in that corridor instead of an audience in this chamber. You could have let your guards finish what the trap was designed to start. You did not. A war benefits no one who has to fight it, she says. Only the ones who profit from a safe distance benefit, and I am not interested in fighting a war for someone else's profit. Grace steps up beside me, still rubbing at her wrists, and speaks for the first time since her chains came off, her voice hoarse from disuse. How did you learn to talk like that? She asks, meaning the language, meaning the 6 years I spent studying tones and registers that nobody in my command chain believed would ever be worth the time. Because someone had to, I say, and it is the simplest true answer I have. Because sooner or later, somebody was going to walk into a room like this one, and the only thing standing between a conversation and a massacre was going to be whether that person could actually be understood. The queen crosses back to her throne, but she does not sit, not yet. She turns to face me one last time, and the sweet fear scent that filled the corridor when I first arrived has faded entirely, replaced by something calmer, something that might, in time, become trust. There will be others who tried to start this war, she says. They will not stop with one failed trap. Then we find them together, I say, before you and I both end up paying for someone else's ambition. She considers this, 6 eyes steady on mine, and finally inclines her head, a gesture I recognize from months of study as one reserved for equals rather than strangers. Walk your people to the boarding tube, human, she says, and when your fleet sends its next envoy, send one who can also speak. I gather Oliver and Grace and the 4 others, and we move back through the corridor together, past the same 8 guards who crossed their spears in front of me less than 20 minutes earlier. This time the spears stay lowered, and one of the guards, the one who first tilted her head in surprise, meets my eyes as I pass and speaks a single phrase in her own language, quiet, meant only for me. Well spoken, she says. I answer her the same way I answered the queen, in her own tongue, because some habits are worth keeping even after the danger has passed. We walk the rest of the way in silence, 6 freed hostages, and 1 negotiator who was never supposed to make it this far, and somewhere behind us in that black stone chamber, a queen who expected to need a translator sits alone with the knowledge that this time, for the first time, she did not.